Let's talk a little bit about the average business day for you in 2020 and what that's been like.
I think last time I came on your show, which was early in the pandemic, I talked about that the year 2030 was pulled back to the year 2020. And I meant that in terms of the shift to digital retail. I think what has happened fundamentally is that the pandemic has accelerated a change that I think we've all anticipated for a long time. The center of gravity in terms of commerce and retail has shifted definitively from in-store in a brick and mortar store to online. And I think what we're seeing now is not an anomaly. It is the blueprint for the future of retail. The growth of e-commerce will continue long after we have a vaccine. And I think the resilient retailers who are embracing this true omni-channel model and they're employing resources at their disposal to reach customers wherever they are, they're the ones who are succeeding. Unfortunately, you also have a different segment. You talked about this in your opening remarks. Some businesses are not faring as well. And I think those are the resistant ones. I think there's also this assumption that the only resilient retailers are the startups, the small companies, but that is not the case. I mean, just on Shopify and in Canada, we are seeing brands like Loblaws and Farm Boy and Staples, some of the biggest brands in our country, completely change their business model, and along with Shopify as their partner, have become these incredible stories of resiliency. So I think what we're seeing is a tale of two types of businesses, two types of entrepreneurs, but there is no question that the future looks a lot more like the resilient ones, and unfortunately the resistant ones need to step up quickly.
Well, and we already talked today about Loblaw having big growth in their digital and their e-commerce, so that is a good example. Resistance versus resilience. If you had to pinpoint the issue, is it that they don't want to start a website, they don't want to look at digital channels? I mean, what is it where you see those businesses falling short?
You know, it comes down to challenging past assumptions and being adaptable. You need to sort of read, I mean, like any sport or any activity or any, frankly, I come from, as you probably know, we joked about this before, my first job was that of a DJ. When you're a DJ, you have to read the room. And when you see that the vibe is changing, you see that people are looking for something different, you have to change the way you think about how you operate. And I think what we're seeing now is these resistant retailers, it's not they don't want to set up a website, it's that they're using a past assumption or they're waiting for COVID and the pandemic to end so they can go back to the status quo. Whereas the resilient ones, they see this tidal wave and they're grabbing their surfboard. And what we're trying to do at Shopify is we're trying to make sure that anyone that has that ambition, that resiliency, has all the tools necessary to adapt and to actually not just survive this pandemic, but to actually thrive on the other side of it too. And again, it's not just the small companies. I mean, in Canada alone, we now have more than 65,000 stores on Shopify in Canada. And, you know, you look at Cotton or Nixwear or 437 or Greenhouse Juice or Woodlot. These are brands that have completely leveraged and have rethought their business models to take advantage and to better satisfy their customers. One of the other things that I think is important to call out is that I think a lot of these more resistant retailers, they believe that the strategy is omni-channel. Now, that's not the strategy. The strategy going forward for the future of retail is consumer choice. Sell wherever your consumers are. And if your consumers are online, sell there. If they're offline, make sure you're doing that as well. But they also may be on TikTok or Instagram, or they may be perusing the Walmart marketplace. And that is why we at Shopify believe that our responsibility to entrepreneurs and businesses and brands is to allow them, enable them to sell anywhere they have customers. The tactic to get there is omni-channel, but the strategy is sell wherever your consumers might be.
Well, and you guys have that new partnership with TikTok. So obviously you're looking at a lot of different avenues for these merchants you work with. Something you talked with us about in the past, which kind of feeds off of what you're talking about here, is it's been a big year for Shopify and a lot of the merchants who use your platform. It's been a big year for Amazon as well. And this idea of the Amazon boxes that are steadily showing up on your doorstep and how that, sure, the convenience is great, and obviously a lot of retailers are learning lessons from that, but that it's important for a lot of these merchants and the ones that are using your platform to have their boxes showing up. Like, the branding has to be everywhere. And so how are they navigating through that part of the storyline as well?
So let's talk about this from two perspectives, supply and demand. Let's start with the demand side. consumer preferences have completely changed. And we're seeing two major shifts. The first one is it feels like this is the year of what we're referring to the conscious consumer. More than half of shoppers, 57% of those that we polled, are seeking out local, independently owned businesses to support this year. And consumers are voting with their wallets to support those businesses and those brands whose values reflect their own. That's the first thing. The second thing is that fundamentally, consumers are also voting with their wallets to support brands that are independent. They don't want to be wearing the same stuff as everyone else is wearing. And more, we want to provide consumers with an opportunity to buy great products from great entrepreneurs and have on-time delivery. And that gets into the supply side of it. One of the things that I think people miss about Shopify is that if you were to pretend just for a moment that Shopify was a retailer, we're not a retailer, but pretend that we were. If we were one single store, we would be the second largest online retailer in America, which means that we get incredible economies of scale. Now, if we were that retail, we would traditionally keep those economies of scale for ourselves to level the playing field, to make it easier, make it less expensive for us to operate. But because we're not a retailer, what we're doing is we are distributing those economies of scale to the 1 million and more stores that are on Shopify so that they can provide the same type of customer experience on things like shipping and fulfillment, where they can get capital, they can get payment rates that are typically only available to the largest retailers. And what the end result of this this economy of scale is that we are creating this incredible new playing field so that small businesses can actually become the next large players in their space. They can become the incumbents, and it's actually working.
I think it would be very helpful, especially to entrepreneurs who are listening to you, to find out what usually becomes the hurdle after you've launched a business. You made a point on the conference call actually about the U.S. market, and I think it was your estimate that we'd seen a record number of new businesses launched in the United States during the third quarter. I mean, it makes sense on some levels. People see the opportunity and they get to work during a challenging time. But what is the most common stumbling block that any of those entrepreneurs face once they start with Shopify, and whether they can have success or not?
One of the reasons that it's so important for us to enable our merchants to sell again on social media platforms, on marketplaces, in store, online, is because fundamentally the most successful businesses understand where their consumers are hanging out. If this was 100 years ago, Shopify would have a single channel, which was the town square, because that's where consumers are spending their time. If this was 10 years ago, we would probably have a MySpace channel, because at that point, that's where consumers are spending their time. Today, consumers are spending their time in a bunch of different places. And so I think one of the hurdles that a lot of businesses and entrepreneurs, particularly first-time entrepreneurs, get into is they don't have a great sense of who their consumer is. And so they try to sell on different places that actually may not connect with their true addressable market, with the consumer that wants to buy their products. And so one of the things we'd like to suggest is when you're starting a business on Shopify or elsewhere, experiment, try a bunch of different things. Maybe the TikTok channel works perfectly, but maybe the Facebook channel is far better in terms of conversion of browsers into shoppers and buyers. The thing to remember, though, in 2020, and the reason I made that comment on the earnings call, and the exact statistic is this: we saw the United States saw more business creations in terms of registrations in Q3 than since I think it was 2004. So, I mean, it has been a massive boom. There's way more people considering starting businesses, and a lot of them are doing that on Shopify. However, the reason they're doing it is because the cost of failure is trending towards zero, and because it's never been easier, more accessible to take an idea and turn into a big business. And so I think those are some of the things that get in the way. However, a lot of the businesses that we see on Shopify that have grown to be the large players, whether it's Cotton or it's Knixwear or it's Allbirds or it's Bombas or it's companies like this that didn't exist even 5 years ago that were kind of born on Shopify and grew to be very, very large. They took a very experimental perspective and a very experimental strategy in trying to figure out, this may work, let's try that, let's A/B test it against this other idea and this other assumption. They sort of look at it like a science experiment, and those are the ones that do really, really well. And when you combine great product, incredible ambition, and an appetite to experiment, or a resiliency in terms of a mindset or philosophy, you end up building really, really great companies that employ a lot of people and stay around for a very long time. And more, that's our mission. Shopify is the entrepreneurship company. We want to make entrepreneurship more accessible because we think a world with more entrepreneurs and more small businesses is a much, much better world.